Hello and welcome to Hops and Bros. This week, we're talking distilling.
For an open window on a crafty world, Max and Chris from Ups and Brews. Ups and Brews. Welcome to Ups and Brews.
All right, so before we get started, I wanted to quickly mention our sponsor, Brew HQ. It is a brewery, home brewing supply shop that services all of Canada. They have an excellent online shop, which is very clear, very well defined. Anyone who wants to get into brewing, and these days, I've been walking through the grocery stores, there's no yeast, everyone's making bread. Make beer. Beer is the fun version of bread, if you will, and they have everything you need, ingredient, equipment. They ship all across Canada. It's an excellent resource for everything that is home brewing. We're very happy to have them as partners on the show. So the link is going to be down there. Definitely go check it out. And if you are thinking of getting into brewery, it's the best first step. Just go see them, go on their website, get the equipment there. They can answer all your questions. It's an awesome resource. Check it out. Anyways, on with the show. All right, so this week we're taking a look at distilling. One of the reasons why I wanted to take a look at distilling was there's a lot of parallels to be made between distilling alcohol and brewing beer. The biggest one is that grain is often used as the base sugar for distilling, making the first part of a distill, of a whiskey, of a scotch, of a rye, the same as brewing. The only difference is that you're going to distill that alcohol later on to create your spirit, which I wanted to dive deeper into. And with this pandemic going on, a lot of breweries and a lot of different distilleries, craft distilleries, have been stepping up and creating hand sanitizer or sanitizer in general and giving it away to whoever needs it. Not necessarily the general public, but hospitals and anywhere where they don't have access to Purell anymore, to that sanitizer, which I think is brilliant. The biggest one that I'm going to name right now is Dillon's. Dillon's, I think, is, well, the first one that I kind of saw doing this, a craft distillery from the Niagara area, giving away that spirit, giving away that sanitizer to help with, what's going on around us. So I thought it was really cool. Now, Chris, what's the history behind distilling? It's a little different than brewing, but I'm sure there's a lot of cool stuff.
And yes, Max, it's awesome to see some breweries starting to distill their own, but also starting from the ground up as a brewery, but also as a distillery. And it's also quite nice to see distilleries moving on and creating hand sanitizer at the moment right now. It's very appreciated for the professional in health, but also for consumers that want to get free bottles. I know that Brewdog out there in Scotland is giving away free bottles to healthcare workers to push the effort against COVID-19, and it's amazing how all industries kind of like brings all this good stuff together, and also distilleries turning back to their original roots. Distilling originated back 800 BC. Yes, BC. And the first writings of distillings were really tightly knitted, related to medicine. And it's not until the 8th century when an alchemist created the alembic. The invention of the alembic really helped everyone gaining access to the distilling process. It was much easier, but also most of the writings back in the 7th and 8th century were closely related to medicine. So mostly apothecaries were creating medicine from distilled alcohols like wine. Most writings until the 17th, 18th centuries were all related, alchemy related, chemistry related towards medicine. So people with various diseases were treated with distilled versions of different alcohols, but also sugary solutions, because one main difference between fermentation and distilling is that fermentation can happen by accident. It's a natural process. Distilling, it's a more human process. You need to do some science to have this end product in the end process. So with all that, it's not until the 17th, 18th centuries, around medieval times, that we saw people using distilled alcohol as a recreative source or recreative drug. It always has been kind of like portrayed as an evil part compared to beer, let's say. A good example of that is two publications that were published in the 1750s in London. One called Beer Street and the other one called Gin Lane, and they were all portraying beer drinkers as fantastic people, outgoing, easy life, happy and all, and gin people as evil. And all this really sprung up in London back in the day and pushed people into two different camps, into beer and gin. Distilling is still mesmerizing to me. I'm not a big science guy, and also I don't drink a lot of fortified alcohols like gin, vodkas, or whiskeys. Max is a bit more into that, and also is in the Niagara area, so you have access to all those fantastic distilleries. Max, what's distilling, and can you do that at home? That's one thing that I know it's sketchy because it can like explode everywhere, and from what I've seen with hillbillies doing alcohols in the backyards, it's not always turning out very good. So Max,
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, I do think that the whole history behind distilling and Gin Lane especially is kind of cool. It's kind of a preview into the whole alcohol abuse, yet how beer was essential for the survival of our species, and alcohol in general, gin, was kind of viewed as something very, very negative back in the day. Now, let's look at the process. When it comes to a lot of different alcohols, whether it's wine, beer, spirits, ciders, any of that stuff, it's all the same base. You're looking at a sugar source that you will ferment into whatever you'd like. So for wine, it's a grape base. For ciders, it's a fruit base. For beer, it's a grain base. And for alcohol, well, you use any other base, and then you will concentrate that. You would distill that into an alcohol. I'll look more into the grain aspect of it, seen as we usually try to refer more towards beer. And essentially, it's the same. You're looking at fermenting a source and then distilling it further. When it comes to grain, to a grain base alcohol or distill, the initial process is exactly the same. You're extracting sugars from that grain by heating it up, activating those enzymes. The only difference is that you want to maximize the amount of alcohol you're going to ferment out of that base, because whatever you start with is what you're going to end up with, in the sense that by distilling, you're cutting into that percentage, concentrating it, but losing some volume in the process. So you want to add enzymes, you want to add a very specific yeast, not a beer yeast. You're going to want a yeast that's going to ferment a lot higher in alcohol than beer yeast would. So that's where it differs. You're still using grain, you're still extracting the sugar from the grain, but when you're fermenting, you're not going to want to promote any kind of good flavors from it or incredible flavors from it, because you're not looking to drink that base. You're going to distill that base further. So as long as there's a lot of alcohol, you're happy with that process. Don't get me wrong, the source of sugar will affect the end result, the end alcohol. You're going to have some subtleties and flavors that are going to vary depending on the base that you've used. So if you use a whiskey that has a lot of rye grain in it, it's going to taste a little different than one that has none. And same thing if you're using a wine base versus a beer base. I'm using wine and, fruit versus grain. Anyways, so if you're using a wine base or a fruit base versus a grain base, you are going to have a different end result. You're going to have a different flavor when it comes to that distill, that alcohol, and that spirit. Now, the process of distilling, one of the most popular, version of a still that people are using is a column still. So what ends up happening is you're evaporating the alcohol, concentrating it, evaporating, concentrating until you have your end spirit. And you do that in a column. So you have steps where it's going to heat up the alcohol, evaporate, reconcentrate, reheat, and then keep on going until you have your end result. That's why a high base ABV is very important, because you're evaporating the alcohol out of the liquid, out of the water, and you're discarding the water. You're only keeping the alcohol content. So the more you do that, the more liquid you're evaporating, the more water you're taking away from it. Therefore, your general volume, your total volume for that batch is going to be lower, because you're taking away some of it as you're going. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's the head, the heart, and the tail when you're distilling. The big difference between all of those is the head you want to discard. There's going to have some kind of... I forget the name of it, but anyways, the first part can be poisonous. The middle part is what you want to keep. That's the ethanol, that's the alcohol, that's what you're looking for. And then the tail also have some of those things that you don't want, that you don't necessarily want in the end. So that's why distilling is a little more complex than making beer, and is a little more dangerous. There's very, very few things that you can do to beer that will cause it to be harmful to humans. But in distilling, the process of distilling can cause death to humans. So that's why that kind of the head, the heart, and the tail is super important when you're distilling. I wouldn't necessarily recommend distilling at home unless you know what you're doing, but beer is very easy to do at home. That's pretty much distilling. If you have any more questions, if you want to know more about this, please let us know in the comments below, and maybe we can revisit the subject. I think it's really cool. Obviously, we're a lot more knowledgeable in beer than spirits and distilling, but I still think something that's really cool and something that breweries should look into, considering that most of the equipment you already have for brewing, you would use for distilling as well. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, be safe out there, and go check out Brew HQ for all your home brewing needs. Good friends of us from the show, and if you want to get into home brewing, it's the best place to start.